So I have a question. Who here ever read Choose Your Own Adventure books? Handful. A few of you have no idea what we're talking about. Choose Your Own Adventure. I loved these when I was a kid. They'd be little, they were relatively small stories, and you start reading, and you come to a decision you had to make. And I'm just making this up as I go along. Like, let's say, in the story there's a boulder coming at you. You have to choose to jump left or jump to the right or something like that. And if you choose jump to the left, then you turn to page 34. If you choose jump to the right, you turn to page 127 or something like that. And then, you make your choice, you turn to the page, and you find out if you lived or you died. That's basically how the story went. But it wasn't always that simple. Sometimes it would branch off. So you make your choice, and then it's like, well, now you have to climb a ladder. Are you going to climb up or are you going to climb down? And then you find out, maybe both of those end in your death. So I learned to read and hold my fingers in all the different pages and be like, because I didn't want to start from the beginning and be like, okay, I'm going to jump left, but okay, no, that ends in death, so I'm going to go to the right and go where I want to go. Now, this is going to seem like it makes no sense at all, but this is a non sequitur, seemingly. A man named Joseph de Maistre, he has a quote said, "Every nation gets the government it deserves. Every country has the government it deserves." The problem with that is that as a part of the society, I also get the government that our nation deserves, and you get the government that our nation deserves. And I'm not being political here, I'm not talking about any particular government, just that there are frustrations with any government. Now imagine if it was a choose your own adventure when it came to the rules. Just any time you came to a decision, you said, you know what, I feel like doing this, so this is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to have anything rule me. It sounds great, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound like heaven on earth, just this idea that anything I want to do, I'm allowed to do? I think it sounds great. At first. I see some people shaking their heads because you're smart. Because it's actually a nightmare. Because it's perfect for me, but the problem is, it results in anarchy, because what I want to do is not the same thing that you want to do, and it's not the same thing that some criminal wants to do. And by the way, there's no such thing as a criminal, because there's no law against what they want to do. You have to have some kind of rule. Even if we don't agree with it or don't like it, we have to obey it. The thing is, government does not get to rule your heart. It may rule your head, it may rule your actions, but it doesn't rule your heart. You don't have to choose to love doing the things that you have to do. You just have to do them. But our big idea for today is that every day you get to choose who rules your heart. Every day you get to choose heaven on earth. So I sort of said, if you get to do whatever you want, it seems like heaven on earth. The actual truth is that wouldn't be. But every day you get to choose heaven on earth. And that'll hopefully make sense by the end of the message. Today we're doing part 4 of a series called Journey to Bethlehem. We are looking at this small little town. In fact, we'll find out there were 2 towns named Bethlehem, but we're referring to just the one town, which pops up all throughout the Old Testament. It just, here and there, just every once in a while, this town shows up. And what we're doing is we're looking at some of those stories to find out what we can learn about Jesus, because Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And everything about our lives should be focusing on Jesus. It should be pointing, if we're reading the Old Testament, it points forward to Jesus. If you're reading the New Testament, it points back to Jesus. If you're living your life, Jesus should be in your heart, guiding your life. And so as we go through this journey to Bethlehem, we want to find out what can these stories teach us about Jesus. And so we're going to start actually a short little passage in the New Testament, one that you are probably familiar with. We sing a song called We Three Kings, talking about these wise men. Starting Matthew chapter 2, starting verse 1. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea, during the reign of King Herod. About that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. And, we sing the song, We Three Kings. We talk about them as wise men. They were probably, if you know your Old Testament, you know the story of Daniel. They were probably people like Daniel. They were people who were trained to look for signs, to tell them about the future. Probably Zorian astrologers is my guess is what they were. But we call them kings, we call them wise men. They're probably people who are very well off. And they came from eastern lands, and they arrived in Jerusalem. And they asked, "Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we have come to worship him." Which is not the kind of news that you want to hear if you're the existing king. So King Herod was deeply disturbed when he heard this. I mean, what we know of King Herod is that he was a vicious man. He was a vicious ruler. He would have no problem killing anybody to maintain control and power over his throne. So when these three wise men, maybe you might want to call them kings, powerful seeming people from the east come and say, "Hey, we heard there's a new king. We want to worship him," Herod's going to have a problem with that. He's going to be deeply distressed. And then it says, as was everyone in Jerusalem, because everyone in Jerusalem knows that when Herod ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. All right? They know that this is going to be a problem. So Herod called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law, and he asked, "Where is the Messiah supposed to be born?" Now, the wise men come from the east. They want to know where he's going to be born so they can go and worship him. Herod wants to know where he's going to be born so he can go and kill him. And they say, "In Bethlehem in Judea. For this is what the prophet wrote. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not least among the ruling cities of Judah. For a ruler will come from you who will be the shepherd for my people Israel." And so we're actually going to step out of that story now and go back to the time when that was written. It was written by a man named Micah. He was a prophet to Judah. And so I spoke a few weeks ago and talked about the history of Israel and talked about how there was like a northern kingdom of Israel and a southern kingdom of Israel. They had sort of had like a civil war at one point. I've spoken a lot about Isaiah in the last little while because I've been doing a class on Isaiah and it just keeps kind of popping up. Also, we tend to focus on a number of passages from Isaiah this time of the year. Isaiah was a prophet around the same time as Micah. Now, what's interesting is that Isaiah gave a message to the king of Jerusalem from God, and he said, "You don't need to worry about what's going to happen." See, the Assyrian army was like basically at the gates. They had conquered the north, and they were working their way down and killing everybody on the way, and it looked like they were going to conquer Jerusalem. And Isaiah gave a message and said, you don't need to worry. God's in charge. He's in control. They're not even going to shoot an arrow at the walls. And because it's God's word, it's true. And so it's interesting to me that Micah, who was a prophet around the same time, a prophet of the same city, said this in Micah chapter 5. It said, "Mobilize, marshal your troops. The enemy is laying siege to Jerusalem. They will strike Israel's leader in the face with a rod." The word there for rod is actually like scepter. And all the passages we're going to look at here talk about this idea of a scepter. I was curious where we got the word scepter from. And so I looked it up. And the word scepter actually comes from like the word lean. And so the idea is it would be almost like a walking staff, like something that you would lean on, but it came to be something that would represent authority. And so now you've got the king of Israel being told that he's going to be struck in the face with this rod. So you're a king, you've got a scepter, someone's going to take that scepter from you, and they're going to smack you in the face with it. What does that say about your authority? What does that say about your right to rule in that moment? And how do we understand this idea that Isaiah said, you don't need to worry, God's not going to let it happen, and now Micah's saying, you're going to be conquered? And the answer is quite simple, actually. Isaiah was talking about Assyria. Micah is talking about Babylon. And this is exactly what we see play out. Assyria comes, they get really close to Jerusalem. God arranges it so that they go back and they never come close again. Babylon, on the other hand, comes all the way in and they conquer Jerusalem. And then we get to this passage that we just read about. The wise men are trying to figure out where is this Messiah going to be born, and they use this passage from Micah, which starts off really horribly. The king is going to have his authority taken. He's going to be beaten with the thing that represents his authority. What do you think that means for the little town of Bethlehem that's just outside of Jerusalem? I mean, if Jerusalem, with all its walls and an army, is going to be conquered, what's going to happen to the tiny town outside of Jerusalem? Are they going to stand any kind of chance? And the message that Micah gives is actually quite surprising. It says, "But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrathah." And really that's just a way of clarifying which Bethlehem he's talking about. So there's Jesus, we'll fast forward now for a second. Jesus is known as being Jesus of Nazareth. Even though he was born in Bethlehem, he sort of grew up in Nazareth. Just outside of Nazareth is a little town called Bethlehem. Bethlehem in the north. But here, we're talking about Bethlehem Ephrathah, which is Bethlehem in the south. It'd be very similar to someone today talking about London, Ontario versus London in the UK. Like just sort of, there's two different places, and you have to determine which one it is. And he's talking about the one in the south. So again, you'd think, if Jerusalem was being conquered, what chance does Bethlehem have? And he says, "You, Bethlehem Ephrathah, are only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet a ruler of Israel, whose origins are in the distant past, will come from you on my behalf." So Micah is not saying you're not going to have a hard time right now. He's simply saying a time will come when a ruler is going to come out of your town, and he's going to be known as someone from the distant past. Now, how does that work? John chapter 1, verses 1 to 5 says, "In the beginning, the Word," referring to Jesus, "the Word already existed. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." So all the way back at the beginning of time, when God created the heavens and the earth, that was Jesus. God the Son was creating everything, spoke everything into being, simply with a word of his mouth. And so we get this idea that, a ruler whose origins are in the distant past. Jesus existed before time began. Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and Micah is saying, Micah is having this vision of a word from God saying to the people of, I know things are bad right now. I know Jerusalem is being conquered. I know the Babylonians have probably run over your land, but trust me, it's going to be better. At some point in the future, a ruler whose origins are from the distant past is going to come out of your town. He goes on, he says, "The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. Then at last his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land." And this is talking about what kind of leader he's going to be. "He will stand to lead his flock with the Lord's strength, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, for he will be highly honored around the world." This is the kind of leader that's going to come out of you, Bethlehem. Again, I know things are bad right now, but hold on. Someday, someone is going to come. He's going to be the ultimate ruler. He's going to rule with strength. He's going to stand with his flock. He's going to be the source of peace. Now, there are different types of peace. Maybe one of the easiest ones to understand, but maybe the hardest to actually maintain is sort of the peace within. The peace of God. Jesus talked about this. He said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Don't let your heart be troubled." It's the sense of saying, I believe that God is in control. It's this mentality that says, things around me may be going crazy, but in my heart, I have peace because I know I've got Jesus. There's a second kind of peace, which is the peace with others, the kind we usually think of when someone is asking why they want to be Miss America. What do they always say? I want world peace, right? Like this is what my goal is. This is what everybody wants to see, world peace. And I don't think we've had world peace since almost the beginning of time. There's always someone at war. There's always something going on. I'm sure there's probably a couple days here and there where there's nobody attacking someone else, but look around the world right now. We don't have peace with others. You might have peace with your neighbor, but on the whole, there isn't peace. The most important one, of course, is peace with God. Paul wrote about this in his message to the Romans. He said, "Therefore, since we have been made right in God's sight by faith, we have peace with God because of what Jesus Christ our Lord has done for us." So, Micah, telling the people, I know things are bad right now. Someone is going to come. He's going to be a shepherd. He's going to stand with you. He's going to come from the distant past. He's going to be our peace. He's going to bring you peace within. He's going to bring peace amongst your neighbors. But most importantly, he's going to bring you peace with God. Well, let's talk more about this idea of a scepter. It comes up in another passage, Genesis chapter 49. This is a time when Jacob, who is now known as Israel, is speaking to all his sons. And he's basically giving them a blessing. It's basically his farewell message. I know I'm on the way out. I want to give you a blessing before I go. And he says something to each of the sons. And this is what he says to Judah. The scepter, the rod, this is the thing, the authority, the walking staff, which represents authority, will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs. Other translations say Shiloh, but the meaning actually there is the one who owns the authority, the one whom all nations will honor. So again, we're talking about this figure from the distant past that's going to come. He's going to be the king. He's going to be the king of peace. He's going to bring us peace. What kind of king will he be? He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. Seems strange, doesn't it? What is that supposed to mean? Well, it simply means that there's going to be a time of abundance. If you're worried about how much you're going to eat, you're not going to let your donkey. You're not going to tie him up next to your food source. But in a time of plenty, it's like, yeah, go ahead, donkey, have fun. Eat as much as you want, because I know I've got tons more. He washes his clothes in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. That's kind of a difficult passage to understand. My best understanding of that is that he's going to be a conqueror. He's going to be somebody who conquers. Like, think about what it would be like if your clothes are washed in wine. Right? You've been to battle. But now we come through to a time of victory. But we also understand this to be a victory of a different sort, because we know who Jesus is, and we know what Jesus went through. I mean, you think about the suffering that Jesus went through, his clothes would have been like they were, washed in wine. It's a different type of victory, but it's victory all the same. And then the last passage I want to look at this morning is Isaiah chapter 9. It was read earlier. And as Rick was reading, did a great job reading it, I thought to myself, there's parts in here that need explanation, because they seem like they're pretty harsh. Especially in the middle of what we were doing with the kids and talking about, uniforms bloodstained by war and that sort of thing, but I think it'll make sense as we go. It starts by saying, verse 2, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. For those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. Well, now, why does he say that? Because of how chapter 8 ends. Chapter 8 talks about sort of the same message as Micah. A time is coming where darkness is going to rule the land. A time is coming when you are going to be conquered. Like your people will be in darkness, and it's going to be awful. But guess what? Good news. Chapter 9, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in a land of deep darkness, a light will shine. So Micah refers to this one coming from the distant past. Jacob, years before, knows that from Judah, the scepter is not going to depart from you. There's going to be a ruler that's going to come from you. Micah talks about this ruler. Now in Isaiah, we find out more about this ruler. He's going to be a great light in the time of darkness. You will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. This ruler, think about how important it is for a king, for people to have a good king. A country rises and falls on the strength of its leader, especially in those days. When one man was basically in charge of everything. Not a democracy, but simply a dictatorship. If that king was good, that was good news for the nation. If that king was bad, it was bad news for the nation. If your king was strong, your nation was going to rise up and be victorious. If your king was weak, someone else was going to beat up on you. But here it says that this ruler, this person we've been talking about, you will enlarge the nation of Israel, and its people will rejoice. They will rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, like warriors dividing the plunder. This is a time of victory, a time of celebration. I mean, we're not even necessarily talking about the battle or anything like that. We're talking about the mentality, the feeling of excitement, joy, like a harvest time, or like after the war is done and you're victorious. It says, you will break the yoke of their slavery. Talking about this leader. Lift the heavy burden from their shoulders. You will break the oppressor's rod, just as you did when you destroyed the army of Midian. He goes on, it says, the boots of the warrior and the uniforms, blood-stained by war, will all be burned. They'll be fuel for the fire. Again, it's kind of a strange message when we're talking with kids in the room, but when we understand what it means, we're talking about now we're on the far side of war. We don't need our boots anymore. We don't need our uniforms that are blood-stained by war. We can burn it because we are now living in a time of peace. Our king, our ruler, has come, and he has been victorious. And now we have a time of peace. And we get to the passage that's probably most well known here. Unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given. The government will rest on his shoulders. And again, that's a difficult thing to understand. What does it mean for the government to rest on Jesus' shoulders? And I think it has something to do with this idea of the scepter, the rod. The word we understand for that is like you're leaning on it. And so the government, it's going to be leaning on God. It's going to be leaning on Jesus. You know the saying, what it means to have like the weight of the world on your shoulders? Well, all of that is going to be off your shoulders, and it's going to be on Jesus' shoulders. It means that we're going to be able to trust in our ruler, trust in our leader, because we know that he's got this. The government, every bit of authority is going to be resting on Jesus' shoulders. Kind of like a robe, when a king walks down and they've got this big robe hanging on his shoulders, it's a symbol of his authority, of his kingship. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor. It might actually be, he will be called Wonderful. He will be called Counselor. Or it might be that he will be called Wonderful Counselor. And I think any one of those is fine. Because Jesus is certainly wonderful, and he is a counselor, and he's certainly going to be a wonderful counselor. He's going to be called. And this doesn't actually mean that people would refer to him as this. It simply means that this is going to be the people will look at him and they will see him as the wonderful counselor. They will understand that he is mighty God. They will know that he is the everlasting Father. And what we're talking about this morning, he is the Prince of Peace. So the wise men come from the east, and they want to know where this Messiah is going to be born, and it takes them to Micah. And we learn about this idea of a scepter, and so that takes us, to Genesis. And so you got Jacob, you got Micah, you got Isaiah, all referring to this person who's going to come. Even in times of darkness, a light will come and shine, and he's going to be amazing, wonderful, mighty, everlasting. He's going to be the Prince of Peace. And so you have a choice this morning. You can start following the Messiah today. We know that this is going to be something that's going to come in the future. Like Jesus has already come, yes. He's going to come again in glory. He's going to come again in power. He's going to come again to reign on earth. But until that day, he can reign in your heart. Let the Prince of Peace rule in your heart. A day is going to come when Jesus will reign on earth, but today he can reign in your heart. We all need to wait until that day that Jesus brings peace on earth. But we can embrace the idea of peace with each other right now, especially those of us in the family of God. That's what we're called to do. Most importantly, we have peace with God. We can have the kind of peace that Jesus brings us in our heart and our spirit, knowing that he's in control. So as the prayer team comes up, I want to challenge you to worship this Prince of Peace. Let him rule your heart.